After 20 years he claimed he needed space and demanded a divorce. I signed without a word. Months later, as he celebrated his engagement to his secretary at our old vacation spot, I arrived unannounced. "Congratulations," I said, handing him an envelope. "His fathers will had a clause. Divorce me, lose everything." His fiancée's scream was priceless. "I need space." 3 simple words that shattered 20 years of marriage on a Tuesday evening at Giovanni's, our favorite restaurant. Not, "I'm unhappy," or "we need to talk," but the coward's prelude to abandonment, delivered between the chicken parmesan and tiramisu. Robert didn't even have the decency to meet my eyes when he said it, his attention fixed on the condensation sliding down his water glass, as if it were somehow more deserving of his focus than the woman who had devoted 2 decades of her life to him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real beginning was 3 weeks earlier in a sterile examination room with mint green walls and motivational posters about courage that suddenly felt like mockery. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have stage 2 breast cancer." Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but firm, her eyes kind behind practical glasses. "The good news is we've caught it relatively early. With surgery and radiation, the prognosis is quite favorable. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining Margaret's journey from betrayal to empowerment. If stories of resilience and unexpected strength in the face of life's cruelest surprises speak to you, consider subscribing. It's completely free and connects you with others who understand that sometimes the perfect life is merely an illusion. Now let's witness how 20 years of marriage can shatter in an instant, and how sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected ways. I remember nodding mechanically, asking all the right questions, scheduling follow-up appointments, going through the motions while feeling strangely detached from my own body. Cancer. At 48, the word itself felt foreign in my mouth, like a bitter pill I couldn't quite swallow. The timing couldn't have been worse. Robert had been promoted to senior partner at his law firm just months earlier. The new position came with longer hours, more stress, and higher expectations. I'd spent weeks assuring him I could handle everything at home. The endless social obligations, charity functions, dinner parties, all the invisible work that made his success possible. And now this. An inconvenient illness that didn't fit into our carefully curated lives. I rehearsed breaking the news to him on the drive home, planning to approach it calmly, rationally, the way Robert preferred to handle difficult situations. But when I arrived, our house was empty. A text message pinged, "Working late. Don't wait up." The 3rd time that week. I placed my hand over my chest, feeling the hidden enemy within, and wondered when exactly my husband had started pulling away. That night, I sat alone in our kitchen, tracing the veins of the marble countertop we'd selected together during our 10th anniversary renovation. When had our home become a showpiece rather than a sanctuary? When had I become just another carefully chosen accessory in Robert's climb to success? Looking back, the signs had been there for months. Robert's sudden interest in his appearance, new designer suits, a gym membership he actually used, the expensive cologne I didn't recognize. Our conversations grew shorter, his criticisms sharper. The way he checked his phone constantly during our rare dinners together. How he flinched when I touched him. But I'd been too busy maintaining our perfect life to acknowledge what was happening right in front of me. "Margaret, did you reschedule the dinner with the Hendersons?" Robert asked the next morning, not bothering to look up from his phone during our brief overlapping minutes at breakfast. "I thought we could talk about something important first," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can it wait? I have court in an hour and the Jacobson case is a mess." I swallowed the news along with my lukewarm coffee. "Sure. It can wait." But it continued to wait as days stretched into a week, then 2. Robert came home later each night, his excuses increasingly vague. I scheduled my first oncology appointment alone, telling myself I was being strong, independent, not abandoned. In the quiet moments between maintaining appearances and researching treatment options, I began to notice the gaps in our life together. The framed photos throughout our home that captured smiles but not joy. The separate bedrooms we'd been occupying for months under the pretense of his late work hours and my early mornings. Then came the credit card statement with charges from jewelry stores I'd never visited, restaurants too intimate for business meetings. The late-night phone calls he took in the garage, voice lowered. The lipstick shade on his collar that wasn't mine, a vibrant red I'd never had the confidence to wear. "I think we should have a special dinner this weekend," Robert said that Friday, his voice oddly formal. "There's something important we need to discuss." Hope flickered. Perhaps my illness had made him realize what truly mattered. Perhaps we could still salvage what we'd built. I spent hours preparing for that dinner, choosing a dress that hid my recent weight loss, applying makeup to disguise the dark circles beneath my eyes. I even called my sister, breaking my silence about the diagnosis. "He's finally noticed something's wrong," I told her. "Maybe this is what we needed, a wake-up call." "Maggie," she said hesitantly, "have you considered that might not be what he wants to talk about?" I dismissed her concern. 20 years of marriage had to count for something. Giovanni's was quiet that Tuesday evening, the soft lighting creating a false sense of intimacy. Robert seemed nervous, tugging at his collar, checking his watch. Something cold settled in my stomach as I realized he'd chosen a public place for whatever was coming next. "I need space, Margaret," he finally said, cutting me off mid-sentence as I began to tell him about my diagnosis. "This isn't working anymore." The words hung between us like shattered glass. 20 years isn't working?" I asked quietly. "I've changed. You've changed. We want different things now." His rehearsed speech continued, full of empty platitudes and corporate-sounding euphemisms. "It would be better for both of us to make a clean break." "Is there someone else?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His hesitation was answer enough. "Jessica," he admitted finally. "My secretary. It just happened. Just happened." As if 2 decades of marriage could be erased by something that just happened. As if my cancer diagnosis, which I still hadn't managed to share, was less significant than his newfound passion for a woman half my age. "I want a divorce," he concluded, sliding a business card across the table. "My lawyer will be in touch. I've already found an apartment." I stared at the card, at his perfectly manicured fingers, at the expensive watch I'd given him for our 15th anniversary. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked startled, as if he'd expected tears, pleading a scene. "Yes," he said cautiously. "I suppose it is." I nodded once, placed my napkin beside my barely touched meal, and walked out of Giovanni's with my dignity intact and my heart in pieces. The cancer would have to wait. I had a divorce to survive first. The manila envelope arrived exactly 7 days after Giovanni's. Robert's lawyer, not even someone from his own firm, but a divorce specialist with an office in a gleaming downtown tower, had wasted no time. I placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and stared at it for hours before finding the courage to break the seal. Inside lay the cold, clinical dissection of 20 years together. Our house, to be sold, proceeds split, retirement accounts, divided equally, personal property itemized with surgical precision. Robert had even listed the anniversary pearls he'd given me 5 years ago, assigning them a monetary value as if they were just another asset to be divided. The final page required only my signature to dissolve 2 decades of promises. I should have called my own lawyer. I should have fought. But something inside me had shifted that night at Giovanni's, a quiet calculus forming beneath my grief. "Are you sure about this, Maggie?" My sister Claire's voice crackled through the phone line. "He doesn't deserve an easy way out. You should take him for everything he's worth." "I need to focus on my health right now," I replied, not mentioning that I still hadn't told Robert about my diagnosis. Fighting him would just drain energy I don't have. What I didn't tell Claire was that my surrender wasn't defeat, it was strategy. Every instinct told me to wait, to watch, to let Robert believe he'd won. I signed the papers with steady hands, wrote a brief note declining mediation or further discussion, and sent the package back the same day. Then I made 2 phone calls. One to my oncologist to schedule surgery, the other to George Mitchell, my father-in-law. George had always been more parent to me than my own father. After my mother died when I was in college, it was George who stepped in with quiet support and practical guidance. When Robert and I married, George embraced me fully as his daughter. Even as Robert grew increasingly distant over the years, my weekly lunches with George remained a constant. "I was wondering when you'd call," George said when he answered. His voice, still strong at 82, carried a note of resignation. "Robert told me yesterday." "Did he tell you why?" I asked, settling onto my porch swing. A heavy pause. "He gave me some nonsense about growing apart. But I've seen how he looks at that girl from his office. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, connected by our shared disappointment in the man we both loved. "I'd still like to have our lunch on Thursday," I said finally. "If that's okay with you." "Nothing would make me happier, Margaret. Nothing at all." 2 days later, I sat across from George at Mercer's Cafe, watching him methodically butter his toast. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly more stooped. "Robert gets his ruthlessness from his mother," George said suddenly, setting down his knife. "I always hoped your gentleness would soften those edges." "I think I enabled them instead," I admitted. George reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I need to tell you something, Margaret. Something important." He explained that after his wife died 6 years ago, he'd made changes to his will. Robert was his only child, set to inherit the family business, the lake house in Vermont, and a substantial estate. "But I added a condition," George said, his eyes never leaving mine. "A moral clause, my lawyer called it." I listened, stunned, as George revealed the provision. Robert would forfeit his entire inheritance if he ever divorced me without clear evidence of infidelity on my part. The divorce had to be initiated by me, or by him with documented proof of my misconduct. "Why would you do that?" I whispered. "Because I watched how he treated you even then. How he took your devotion for granted." George's voice grew fierce. "And because I've seen too many men in my generation discard loyal wives once they've served their purpose." I sat back, processing this revelation. "Does Robert know about this clause?" "He never bothered to read the will," George said with a sad smile. "Too busy climbing the ladder to concern himself with an old man's affairs." That lunch changed everything. Walking home, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not hope exactly, but possibility. For the first time, I saw Robert's hasty divorce as what it truly was: a miscalculation. The weeks that followed brought unexpected clarity. While recovering from my lumpectomy, a procedure Robert knew nothing about, I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. I hired a financial advisor to help secure my future. I began radiation treatments with Claire by my side, discovering reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. Then came the Instagram post that ripped open barely healed wounds. Robert's new assistant had tagged him at L'Artiste, an exclusive restaurant known for its romantic ambience. The caption, "She said yes," floated above the image of Jessica's manicured hand sporting a diamond ring that looked suspiciously like the one in my grandmother's jewelry box, the one Robert had always dismissed as outdated. The comments section overflowed with congratulations, including several from couples we'd entertained in our home. The engagement had come mere weeks after our divorce was finalized. The speed of it was both insulting and revealing. That night, I scrolled through Jessica's public profile, piecing together a timeline of their relationship through seemingly innocent photos. Office parties where they stood too close, team dinners where Robert's law partners were conspicuously absent. Their affair had begun long before Robert's request for space. I was about to close the app when I spotted it. A photo of Lakeview Cottage, George's beloved vacation home in Vermont. The caption made my blood run cold. "Planning our perfect engagement party. #justice, #fresh start, #Lakeview memories." The very place where Robert had proposed to me 21 years ago. The property that, according to George's will, would never be his if he divorced me. I set down my phone and walked to the window, watching darkness settle over the neighborhood where I'd spent half my life. The quiet strife I'd been nurturing crystallized into something more defined: purpose. Robert thought he'd walked away with his freedom and his future secured. He had no idea that his father had foreseen this very scenario, or that I now held the power to upend his carefully constructed new life. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar. The engagement party was in 3 weeks. Just enough time to plan my appearance at Lakeview Cottage and deliver the news that would shatter Robert's perfect illusion, just as he had shattered mine. 3 weeks wasn't much time to prepare for the confrontation that would change everything. My radiation treatments left me exhausted, but each session felt like another step toward reclaiming my body from both cancer and the shadow of my failed marriage. The technicians became unexpected confidants, their cheerful, "3 more to go, Mrs. Mitchell," counting down not just to the end of treatment but to my reinvention. "You don't have to keep using his name, you know," Claire pointed out one afternoon as she drove me home from the hospital. "You were Margaret Jenkins for 28 years before you became Margaret Mitchell." The thought struck me with unexpected force. I'd been so focused on what Robert had taken that I'd forgotten what I could reclaim. Jenkins, I said softly, testing the sound of my maiden name. Margaret Jenkins. The next day, I visited the courthouse and filled out the paperwork to restore my former surname. The clerk handling my case, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, studied me over her reading glasses. Divorce? She asked bluntly. Recently, I admitted. She nodded, stamping my form with unnecessary force. I processed mine 30 years ago. Best decision I ever made. She slid the paperwork back to me with a conspirator's smile. Welcome back to yourself, Ms. Jenkins. That small act of reclamation sparked others. I called my old law firm, the one I'd left when Robert's career demanded we relocate, and arranged coffee with my former mentor, Judith Abernathy. At 75, Judith had broken countless glass ceilings and showed no signs of slowing down. So he left you for his secretary? How breathtakingly original, she snorted when I explained my situation. The familiar sharpness of her wit was oddly comforting. And what's your plan now, Maggie? Besides making him regret the day he met you? I hesitated, then shared everything. The cancer, George's will, the engagement party at Lakeview Cottage. Judith listened without interruption, her eyes narrowing strategically. You need documentation, she said when I finished. The will clause is powerful, but only if you can prove it exists and that George was of sound mind when he added it. George gave me a copy, I said, but I haven't told Robert about it yet. And you won't, Judith declared, pulling out her phone. Not until the moment of maximum impact. She made a quick call, then smiled at me. My estate law colleague will meet us at my office in 20 minutes. We're going to make sure this is airtight. As my circle of allies grew, so did my strength. My oncologist declared my prognosis excellent after my final radiation treatment. My financial advisor helped me secure my own apartment and investment strategy. Even my neighbor Michael, a quiet widower who had always been more Robert's friend than mine, stopped by with homemade soup and an unexpected offer. I overheard Robert at the club last week, he said, eyes fixed on his coffee cup. He was telling everyone you'd had emotional problems for years and he'd finally had to end things for his own well-being. Michael looked up, his expression troubled. I know that's not true. If you need someone to set the record straight, I'm happy to speak up. The revision of our shared history wasn't surprising. Robert had always controlled the narrative, but the casual cruelty of it stung. He wasn't content with leaving. He needed to destroy what we'd had, to justify his actions to himself and others. Thank you, Michael, I said, genuinely touched. Just knowing you saw through it means a lot. With 2 weeks until the engagement party, I focused on the practical aspects of my plan. Judith arranged for a court-certified copy of George's will to be prepared, complete with notarized authentication. Claire helped me select an outfit that would command attention without seeming desperate. A slate blue dress that complemented my newly silver-streaked hair, which I'd stopped coloring during treatment. You look powerful, she said as I tried it on. Like someone who knows exactly what she's doing. I was beginning to feel that way too. The most difficult preparation was emotional. Each night, I visualized the confrontation. Robert's shock, Jessica's confusion, the moment of revelation. I rehearsed my words, perfecting the precise tone of calculated indifference. Not angry, not bitter, just matter-of-fact. A business transaction, nothing more. 1 week before the event, a final piece fell into place when George called me, his voice urgent. Robert just phoned to invite me to the engagement party, he said. I told him I wasn't feeling well enough to travel. You don't want to be there? Asked, surprised. Oh, I absolutely want to be there, George chuckled. But not until after you've delivered the news. I'll arrive the following morning to help clean up the mess. And Margaret? I've instructed my lawyer to send the official inheritance notification letter to arrive at Lakeview the morning after the party. Timing is everything. The day before I was set to leave for Vermont, I discovered through social media that Robert had been busy rewriting more than our history. Jessica had posted photos of Lakeview Cottage's interior, now stripped of the warm antiques and family photographs I'd carefully curated over 2 decades. In their place were sleek, modern pieces, all evidence of the Mitchell family heritage carefully erased, replaced with the sterile aesthetic of a luxury rental. Creating our dream space. New beginnings, the caption read. The cottage had been my refuge whenever Robert's work consumed him. I'd spent countless weekends there, befriending the local shopkeepers, tending the heirloom garden George's mother had planted. Now it was being transformed into a showcase for Robert's new life, with no acknowledgement of what came before. As I packed my overnight bag and placed the sealed envelope containing the will excerpt in my purse, I realized I no longer felt like a victim seeking justice. This wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. Robert had discarded our vows, their meaning, and me. He'd never imagined I might rise from those ashes transformed. I checked my flight confirmation one last time and closed my laptop. Tomorrow, Robert would learn that some promises couldn't be broken without a cost, and I would be there to witness the reckoning. The Vermont countryside unfurled before me as I navigated the rental car along familiar winding roads. Each curve brought a memory. Robert and I driving up for our first anniversary, George teaching us the names of local wildflowers, the autumn we'd spent repainting the cottage's shutters that perfect shade of forest green. Now those shutters were stark white, visible from the road as I approached the final turn. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I pulled over, needing a moment to compose myself. Through the trees I could glimpse Lakeview's distinctive sloped roof, hear faint music and laughter drifting across the lake. The celebration was clearly underway. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had signed divorce papers with quiet resignation just months ago. My hair was styled in a confident bob that showcased the silver strands I'd once hidden. The shadows beneath my eyes had faded. Even my posture had changed, no longer curved inward protectively but straight and resolute. I checked my phone. 4:42 p.m. The party had started at 3. Perfect timing, late enough that everyone would be present, early enough that they'd still be sober and alert. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the long driveway, now lined with expensive cars I recognized from Robert's firm. Near the cottage itself, white paper lanterns hung from tree branches, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. A photographer was directing a group shot on the dock. All tailored suits and flowing dresses, champagne flutes held aloft. No one noticed me at first. I parked alongside the other vehicles and sat for a moment, hand resting on the envelope in my purse. My heartbeat steadied. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about justice. I stepped from the car and smoothed my dress. The slate blue fabric caught the late afternoon sun as I made my way toward the cottage, following the sound of a string quartet playing near the lake. The back garden had been transformed with white chairs and tables adorned with arrangements of calla lilies, Jessica's favorite, according to her Instagram. A bartender mixed cocktails beneath a white tent. Catering staff circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I recognized most of the guests, colleagues from Robert's firm, country club acquaintances, some of our former neighbors. A few glanced my way, their expressions shifting from confusion to discomfort as they recognized me. One woman, Diane Harris, whose husband had made partner the same year as Robert, actually gasped, her champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. "Margaret? Is that you?" she stammered. I smiled pleasantly. "Lovely to see you, Diane. Beautiful party, isn't it?" Before she could respond, I continued toward the center of the gathering, where Robert stood with his arm around Jessica's waist, holding court with the senior partners from his firm. His back was to me, but I would have known his stance anywhere. That particular tilt of his head when he was trying to impress someone, the slight lean into his right hip. Jessica saw me first. Her smile faltered, eyes widening in recognition and alarm. She tugged at Robert's sleeve, whispering urgently. He turned, his expression transitioning from annoyance to shock to a carefully composed mask of civility. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "This is unexpected." "Hello, Robert," I replied, my tone light and conversational. "Jessica. Congratulations on your engagement." A tense silence descended. The string quartet faltered briefly before continuing their melody. Nearby conversations halted as guests turned to witness the unfolding drama. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Robert suggested, already moving to guide me away from the crowd, away from his embarrassment. "Oh, I won't stay long," I assured him. "I just wanted to deliver this in person." I removed the envelope from my purse and held it out. Robert didn't take it. His eyes darted around the gathering, calculating the damage to his reputation. Jessica stepped closer, her hand possessively gripping his arm. "What is it?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. "Just a copy of something Robert should have read years ago," I explained. "Your future father-in-law's will. Specifically, the moral clause regarding divorce." Robert's face paled. "What are you talking about?" I opened the envelope and extracted the notarized document, holding it where both could see the official seal. "George added this provision 6 years ago. It states quite clearly that if you initiated divorce proceedings against me without evidence of infidelity on my part, you would forfeit your entire inheritance." Jessica snatched the document, scanning it frantically. Her perfectly manicured nails crumpled the edges as she read. "This can't be legal," she insisted, looking up at Robert. "Tell her it's not legal." But Robert stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. "My father would never do this to me," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "He did it because he saw who you really were," I replied quietly. "Long before I did." The crowd had grown silent, necks craning to observe our exchange. I noticed Robert's managing partner frowning nearby, no doubt calculating the professional implications. "Everything," I continued, my voice carrying in the stillness. "The firm shares your father held. This cottage. The investment accounts. All of it reverts to George's chosen charity." I paused, allowing the words to sink in. "Unless, of course, you can prove I was unfaithful." Jessica's face contorted with fury. "You planned this," she hissed. "You manipulated an old man to ruin us." I shook my head. "George made this decision years before you entered the picture, Jessica. I only learned about it after Robert left." One of the senior partners approached, his expression severe. "Is this true, Mitchell? Your firm shares aren't secure." Robert's composure cracked. "It's a misunderstanding," he insisted, reaching for the document. "There must be a loophole, an exception." "The official notification from George's attorney will arrive tomorrow morning," I said, retrieving the paper from Jessica's trembling hands. "I just thought you deserved some warning." I glanced at the shocked faces surrounding us. "And I wanted to congratulate you both in person, of course." Jessica stared at me, then at Robert, the implications sinking in. Her dream life, the prestigious law partner husband, the vacation home, the secure future, was crumbling before her eyes. Her scream pierced the afternoon air, a sound of pure rage and disbelief that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. "You said everything was taken care of," she shrieked at Robert. "You promised me." I turned to leave, my part in this drama complete. As I walked back toward my car, I heard the growing chaos behind me. Jessica's continued shouting, guests murmuring in shock, Robert's increasingly desperate attempts to control the situation. I didn't look back. The weight I'd carried for months had lifted, replaced by something unexpected: pity. Robert would lose everything he valued. His reputation, his inheritance, possibly even his partnership if the firm found his financial instability too great a liability. Behind the wheel of my rental car, I took one last look at Lakeview Cottage through the rearview mirror. The string quartet had stopped playing. The white lanterns swayed emptily in the breeze. The perfect engagement party had become something entirely different. I started the engine and pulled away, leaving Robert to face the consequences of his choices, just as I had faced mine. The inn by the lake was quiet that evening, my room overlooking the same water that bordered Lakeview Cottage. I ordered room service and sat by the window, watching darkness settle over the mountains. My phone buzzed incessantly, notifications from mutual friends, text messages from Claire asking for updates, even 2 missed calls from George. I silenced it all, needing space to process what had just happened. I'd imagined this moment for weeks, rehearsed it in my mind, prepared for every scenario except how I would feel afterward. The triumph I'd expected hadn't materialized. Instead, I felt hollow, as if I'd shed something essential along with my anger. Sleep came fitfully, but I woke at dawn feeling oddly refreshed. Over breakfast in the inn's solarium, I finally checked my messages. The news had spread like wildfire through our social circle, each retelling more dramatic than the last. According to Claire, who'd heard from our neighbor Michael, Jessica had thrown her engagement ring into the lake before storming off with her bridesmaids. Robert had gotten spectacularly drunk after most guests departed, ranting about betrayal to anyone still listening. George's voicemail was more measured. I've arrived at the cottage. Robert's here looking quite devastated. My lawyer delivered the official notice an hour ago. Call me when you can. I took my time driving back to Boston, stopping at viewpoints along the way, breathing mountain air that tasted of possibility. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of the city that my phone rang again, Robert's name flashing on the screen. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something told me this conversation needed to happen. Margaret, his voice sounded rough, unfamiliar. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said, pulling into a rest area. Not over the phone. In person. He paused. Please. We met the following evening at a small cafe halfway between his apartment and mine. Robert arrived first, securing a corner table away from other patrons. He looked haggard, his crisp appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and 3 days' stubble. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly as if unsure whether to offer a handshake or hug. Thank you for coming, he said as I took my seat. What did you want to discuss? I kept my tone neutral, not unkind but not inviting either. Jessica left. He stared into his untouched coffee. The firm has asked me to take a leave of absence while they assess the situation. Dad's refusing my calls. His eyes met mine. You've destroyed everything. You did that yourself, Robert. The waitress approached, looked between us, sensed the tension and retreated without taking my order. Why didn't you tell me about the clause? He demanded, leaning forward. All those weeks during the divorce proceedings. You knew and said nothing. Would it have changed anything? Would you have stayed? His silence answered for him. I didn't orchestrate this to hurt you, I said carefully. I just refused to protect you from the consequences of your choices. And now you get the satisfaction of watching me lose everything. I don't get anything, Robert. The inheritance goes to charity, not to me. I studied him, this man I'd spent half my life with. But I did get something else, the chance to stand up for myself. Which brings me to the reason I agreed to meet. I took a deep breath. I have cancer. His face went blank with shock. What? Stage 2 breast cancer. I found out 3 weeks before you asked for the divorce. I tried to tell you that night at Giovanni's, but you were too busy explaining how you needed space. Robert paled. Margaret, I had no idea. I know, I interrupted. And I'm telling you now not to make you feel guilty, but because I'm done keeping secrets. I'm in remission, by the way. The prognosis is excellent. He stared at me, genuinely speechless for perhaps the first time in 20 years. I spent decades being Robert Mitchell's wife, I continued. Arranging my life around your career, your needs. When you left, I thought I'd lost everything. But I was wrong. I smiled slightly. I found myself instead. 2 days later, the law firm's official statement hit the local business news. Robert had chosen to resign to pursue other opportunities. His managing partner, a man who'd dined at our table countless times, wasted no time distancing the firm from the scandal. Friends who'd sided with Robert after the divorce suddenly remembered long-standing coffee dates with me. The ripples spread outward, reshaping social alliances like tectonic shifts. I watched it all with remarkable detachment. My focus had turned inward, toward rebuilding rather than reaction. Spring arrived, bringing an unexpected job offer from Judith's firm. A position managing their nonprofit clients, utilizing the fundraising skills I'd honed through years of charity work for Robert's business connections. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those events I'd organized as his wife becoming legitimate professional experience. They're not hiring you as a favor to me, Judith insisted when I expressed doubt. They're hiring you because you're good at this. You always were. 6 months after the confrontation at Lakeview Cottage, I received a letter from George. He'd decided to sell the cottage, too painful now with its mixed memories. Enclosed was a small key. The garden shed still holds your grandmother's antique gardening tools, he wrote. I thought you might want them. They should belong to someone who appreciates growing things. I drove up the following weekend, half expecting to find Robert there, but the cottage stood empty. The new white shutters had already begun to peel in the harsh mountain weather. Inside the garden shed, I found not only my grandmother's tools but a stack of photo albums I'd assembled over the years. Family holidays, milestones, quiet moments, all carefully preserved by George. As I packed them into my car, a familiar vehicle pulled into the driveway. Robert stepped out, looking healthier than he had at the cafe, though noticeably less polished in jeans and a simple sweater. "Dad said you'd be here," he explained. "I wanted to return something." He handed me a small velvet box containing my mother's earrings, ones I'd thought lost in the divorce settlement. "I should have given these back months ago," he said. "I was too angry then. And now?" He looked toward the lake, then back at me. "Now I'm just trying to rebuild one day at a time. New job at a smaller firm in Providence. Smaller apartment. Smaller life." He offered a rueful smile. "It's not what I planned, but maybe it's what I needed." We walked to the dock together, sitting side by side as we had countless times before, watching the afternoon light play across the water. "You know what's strange?" I said finally. "I don't regret any of it anymore. Not even the end." Robert nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that." As the sun began to set, we said goodbye, not as enemies or even as former spouses, but as two people acknowledging both what was lost and what was found in the breaking. I drove away from Lakeview Cottage for the final time, the photo albums beside me, the road ahead clear and open.